1 going through 19 through 42. After Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a place where there was a garden, which he and his disciples had entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, because Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas brought a detachment of soldiers together with police from the chief priests and the Pharisees. And they came there with their lanterns and torches and their weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that was about to happen to him, came forward and asked them, "Whom are you looking for?" And they answered, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus replied, "I am he." And Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. And when Jesus said that I am he stepped back and fell to the ground. And again he asked him, "Who are you looking for?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said, "I told you, I am he. So if you are looking for me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that had been spoken. I did not lose a single one of those whom you had given me. Then Simon Peter, who had a sword, drew it and struck a high priest's slave and cut off the right ear. And the slave's name was Malchus. And Jesus said to Peter, "Put your sword back into its sheath. Am I not to drink the cup that the Father has given me?" So the soldiers, their officers, and the Jewish police arrested Jesus and they bound him. First they took him to Ananias, who was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, the high priest that year. And Caiaphas was the one who had advised the Jews that it was better to have one person die for the people. Simon Peter and other disciples followed Jesus. Since the disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter, standing outside the gate, so the other disciple, who was not known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the woman who guarded the gate and brought Peter in. And the woman said to Peter, "You're not one of these man's disciples, are you?" He said, "I am not." Now the slaves and the police had made a charcoal fire because it was cold. And they were standing around it, warming themselves. And Peter was also standing there warming himself. And the high priest questioned Jesus about the disciples and about his teachings. And Jesus answered, "I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in the synagogues and in the temple, where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those what was heard to them and what was said to them. They know what I said." And when he had said this, one of the police standing nearby struck Jesus in the face, saying, "Is this how you answer the high priest?" Jesus said, "If I have spoken wrongly, testify to the wrong. But if I have spoken rightly, why do you strike me?" Then Annas sent and bound Caiaphas the high priest. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself, and they asked him, "Are you not one of his disciples?" He denied it and said, "I am not." And one of the slaves of the high priest, the relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, "Did I not see you in the garden with him?" And again Peter denied it. And at that moment, the cock crowed. Then they took Jesus from Caiaphas to Pilate's headquarters. It was early in the morning. They themselves did not enter the headquarters, so as to avoid ritual defilement and to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, "What accusations do you bring against this man?" And they answered, "If this man were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you." And Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and judge him according to your law." And the Jews replied, "We are not permitted to put anyone to death." This was to fulfill what Jesus had said when he indicated the kind of death he was to die. Then Pilate entered the headquarters again and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Jesus said, "Do you ask this on your own, or did others tell you about me?" Pilate replied, "I am not a Jew, am I? Your own nation, your chief priests, has handed you over to me. What have you done?" But Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were from this world, my followers would be fighting to keep me from being handed over to the Jews. But as it is, my kingdom is not from here." So Pilate said, "You are a king." And Jesus said, "You say that I am king. For this I was born, for this I came into the world to testify to the truth. Everyone who belongs to the truth listens to my voice." And Pilate asked him, "What is truth?" And after he had said this, he went out to the Jews again and told them, "I find no case against this man, but you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. Do you want me to release for you the king of the Jews?" They shouted in reply, "Not this man, but Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a bandit. And Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. And the soldiers wove a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they dressed him in a purple robe. They kept coming up to him saying, "Hail, King of the Jews," and striking him in the face. And Pilate went out again and said to them, "Look, I am bringing him out to you that you know that I find no case against him." Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. And Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." And when the chief priest and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him. I find no case against him." And the Jews answered, "We have a law according to the law, that he ought to die because he has claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" Jesus gave no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "You refuse to speak to me. Do you know that I have the power to release you or the power to crucify you?" Jesus did answer, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given to you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's bench. The stone pavement, the Gabbatha. Now it was the day of the preparation for the Passover. It was about noon. And he said to the Jews, "Here is your king." And they cried out, "Away with him, crucify him." Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priest answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Then he handed them over to be crucified. So they took Jesus, carrying the cross by himself. He went out to what is called the place of the skull.